This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Salmond.
Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks with Salmond once again at our popular broadcast time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
You're all waiting for me to say, afore the football.
Right, as Alex says, of course, before the football and while the current First Minister is still just in place.
That, of course, is a broad hint about the content of today's show.
Yes, indeed. In last week's show, we predicted the bust-up between the SNP and the Greens, but not perhaps the spectacular nature of it. This week, we turn to the consequences. Alex spoke earlier to one of Scotland's key political thinkers, Robin McAlpine of the think tank Commonweal, and Alex asked him to look beyond these spectacular headlines of the past 10 days. Let's see what they both had to say.
Well, Robin McAlpine, as the Reverend Jolly might have said, it's been a hell of a 10 days for the SNP. Why on earth did Humza sack the Greens in the rather abrupt manner he did?
I mean, this is really difficult now because you don't really like to be too unkind about people who are now no longer carrying the can and who are about to move on. But fundamentally, it was just the result of an extended period of poor management of his government. So there's so many ways in which, if he'd managed things differently beforehand, they didn't have to end up in that place, down that route. But it was a just a string of events drove them into this position. And even then, it was handled very badly. So part of the problem when you're trying to consider Humza Yousaf's regime, his era, is that it's very difficult to see any one part without looking at all the things that came before it, because accumulation of error just backed him into a corner. And I think that's probably the best way to think of it.
But there must have been, if we leave to one side the sort of ham-fisted way it was done, there has to be an underlying objective that he must have seen in the Green Deal, an impossible situation to continue, that he was drowning because of the albatross round his neck. I mean, what exactly do you think was his objective?
We see, I think, a very slightly different position in this one, which is they're drowning in right now. The Scottish government is drowning equally because of its own actions. Now, yes, the Greens have had some positioning here, which I think is exacerbated events. The log burner, but I come from a rural area. The ban on log burners didn't exactly land well out here. It was just bad policy. The deposit return scheme just looked like an absolute debacle, and obviously this gender stuff is tearing things internally. But, and that's what I would emphasise, the gender stuff tends to tear things internally. If you look at what is phasing the public, it's housing, it's local government services, it's the health service. And those aren't the Green Party's fault. So what I think it was really about was, I don't think he was looking towards an election. I think he was looking at party management. I think he was looking at the fear that there were a growing number of people in his party who were uneasy about the alliance, and that if the Greens were the ones that ended it in that context, that disillusionment with him and the party would grow. So I think this was about party management rather than any bigger vision or any bigger strategic way for how to get through things. And I just think that it's been a clumsy attempt to try and do that, and it just backfired horribly.
So after one bound and he's free on the Thursday morning, he quickly realises that he's in trouble by the afternoon. And from a Green perspective, they decided that well, the cause of independence or anything like that was entirely secondary to the fact that they'd been treated so badly. When do you think Humza realised that he was in mortal danger because of the breakup of the coalition?
I mean, probably about 10 seconds afterwards. That's the really sad thing about Humza. Again, he's not a bad guy in any manner of means, but his errors are so significant that they become apparent very quickly. Now, I think that even I couldn't have guessed quite how petulant the Greens were going to be in the way out. Like I sometimes say to my son, use your inside voice when you're really, really angry. You don't actually have to say it to a television camera. So I don't think, I discussed this before it really fell apart. When I got off a plane and I found out what happened, I had a chat with somebody, and my instincts were this is going to fall apart now. But I didn't judge how quickly or how completely. So I think that I've got some sympathy for him not realising that they were going to come out and go absolutely pure mental. But I don't understand how he thought he was going to finesse this or make it work. So I think it was destined to happen anyway. I just think that the Greens made it inevitable through what I can only describe as really surprisingly petulant behaviour for a senior political party.
Now then, when he gets to the Friday, he writes a letter to all the party leaders in Holyrood, including Ash Regan, significantly. So at that stage, he must have been looking to either get something back together with the Greens, or alternatively looking to make some sort of deal with Ash Regan. Now, everybody could do the counting, and a deal with Ash Regan could have got him through the week. So what happened to blow him off course between Friday and the weekend?
Well, the first thing to say is that, again, it's really difficult because I'm a PR guy. I did political strategy. You can usually read what somebody's thinking by their actions, by what they're briefing, by how they're putting things out. And I spent quite a lot of time trying to work out what the hell's going on. It was erratic. You couldn't read from the things that were happening over the weekend what he was doing. Was he negotiating with Alba? Was he talking to the Greens? Was he hoping for some sort of Hail Mary reasonableness from the opposition parties? Was he going to tough it out? Was it a last throw? It was very poorly signalled. So I would generally be able to take a reasonable guess at where a political figure is from what they're putting out. But in this case, I kept looking at it. I think, is he just making decisions on a minute-by-minute basis? And I suspect that was probably what was actually happening. The thing that killed him off quite clearly at the end was that somebody, let's call it the establishment, the machine, got a sniff that he was proving insufficiently hate-filled towards Alba. And they knifed him. It's clear as a bell they knifed him. When I came off that plane, so this broke when I was in a plane going away to a conference, the coalition deal, and then the resignation broke as I was in a plane coming back. So it was all a bit chaotic for me. And the first thing that happened when I got off the plane and I put the phone on was one of my contacts texted me and says, bloody hell, Humza can't even resign without making an arse off it. And at the time, I'd been inclined to feel that was correct. If you're going to go, you don't speculate that you might go the night before.
You're talking about this infamous front page story from Kieran Andrews in the Times, which was not just that Humza was going, but also that John Swinney was coming.
Yeah, no, it didn't make sense to look at it from the perspective of a government. In theory, Humza was still in control. Now, even if Humza was briefing that he was thinking about resigning, he certainly wouldn't have been briefing who he was going to bring in as his replacement. That's not how it works. So you know that he wasn't doing this. So you know that someone else was doing this. And this is the point at which I say, I swing back and forwards with Humza. Sometimes I think hail Menji, and sometimes I think, oh, you poor soul. And I did swing back to the poor soul front there. He was knifed by his own people. And if that's going to happen, you're supposed to have the decency to take the candidate aside and say, listen, you've lost their confidence. It's time to go. It's from my perspective, it's quite remarkable that his own staff basically chopped his head off through briefing. I can't think of an occasion in which the coup was carried out by the hired help. That's a new experience for me in politics. So he really was stabbed, and it really was the case that the machinery of the SNP, which basically appears now to be the SNP, not the members, not the elected politicians, it seems to be the machinery. And the machinery seems to be able to wake up one morning and say, you know what, let's replace leader. And they seem to be able to do it, and nobody seems to be able to stop them. That's what seems to me to be the lesson from what just happened. And that's, to say that's unhealthy for a political party is an understatement.
So it wasn't the terms of anything that Ash Regan had sent him, because she has, as she put it, set the bar at a very low level. It was just the thought that other people had that dealing with Alapa, with the devil, as they put it, wouldn't be in their best interest. It certainly would have been in Humza's best interest, because he would still be First Minister as we're speaking.
Although I'm not actually sure that's true. I kind of rather feel that things had got to... I mean, by Monday, I was starting to look, and I was going to think, how long can you actually tough this out now? You look out of control. So one of the things that I would say, and again, is it's not about fear. It's just about the reality of it. In politics, an awful lot depends on the ability to which you can give the impression that you're in control of events. Nobody wants to be led by a leader who looks like things happen to them. And by Sunday, I was already looking and I was thinking, I find it very difficult to see Humza as somebody who's giving any impression that he's in control of anything. And those are circumstances in which it would probably be time to get the chop anyway. And as far as I can see, I do think that the negotiations with Alba were the tip point. And as far as I can understand, that people were breaking their backs to try and see if there could be any rapprochement with the Greens to avoid it. And so there's no doubt that that was the final straw. But again, as with so much in Humza, I think it was all baked in. I think it was going to happen, and it was really just a question of what was the trigger. So
let's our last question about Humza. Isn't there an alternative universe where Humza would have taken the Alapa deal, he would have become Humza Houdini over the course of the week and set off in a new First Ministership? Or do you think that's just pie in the sky? Is Humza going to wake up in a month's time and think to himself, what on earth was I doing?
I think probably the more accurate analysis of this is the first bit of what you said could have happened. So he absolutely could have shaken off the shackles of an apparent trap and walked out of it by making the deal. But just from having observed Humza, I'm fairly sure he would walk straight into a rake. So what I mean by this is, I think he absolutely, you could have got one of those good days for Humza. You could have got one of those good days when people say, shrewd move, managed to get this out of a bind, here we go, now he's got a chance to redefine his leadership. And I think it would probably have lasted a couple of days before the next thing that went wrong. So that's the difficulty with all of this. The problem with Humza is it feels to me very Greek tragedy. You can adjust all the details to your heart's content, but the narrative arc was always going in the same direction, and it was always going to end up in the same destination.
So we are where we are. It looks like a coronation of John Swinney, a second coming, as it were, for John Swinney as the SNP leader. How do you think this is going to work out? Firstly, the idea of no serious contest.
There is going to be some point somewhere where the SNP machinery treats its membership with a degree of contempt that's too much. And I think this could be it. So if you remember, in the last leadership election, 48% of the voting, despite the amount that the machinery of the SNP threw to try and basically rig that election, 48% of the memberships of the SNP voted for change. Now, I think if Kate Forbes had stood, that might have been 60% this time. I actually think she would have won comfortably from my readings. From what I've been taking so far, the mood for continuity in the SNP doesn't exist among its membership base. And I just feel that the party membership is going to be sitting with a leader that nobody really wanted. after a period of disaster, with a growing awareness in the party that needs to regenerate and refresh itself, and no route or no path to do it. So, I mean, I've got to say, if I was an SNP member just now, I would say, why? What am I doing? Why am I paying my fees?
But what's the, I mean, obviously I'm a keen observer of the SNP. I tend to agree with you. I think that the SNP membership, assuming that it's still there in some quantities, as they've done in the past, when presented with the opportunity for a necessary change, would have made that necessary change. I think Kate Forbes would have won if she'd stood, and won comfortably. So what's in Kate Forbes' mind, if I may ask, that she didn't grasp that opportunity? Because if you think that, and I'm pretty certain of it, that she must have had some inkling that she could win. So what would make her draw back from the contest? I mean, she hasn't struck me thus far as the sort of woman who draws back from a political contest.
No, I mean, I can be fairly blunt here. I've been staying fairly close to the team, and I spoke to them yesterday, and it clearly wasn't a done deal either way from the tone that I was getting. What I can tell you is I think that one of the reservations that she will have had is that she thinks it's going to be a brutal general election one way or the other, and whoever carries the can for this may take long-term damage on it. I am sympathetic to the suggestion that, you know, what could be as little as, 8 weeks to a general election, having this shit show dropped on you is maybe not a great career move. So I understand that, and I also understand the sheer weight of pressure that has been put on her in the party. And remember that Kate is very capable, but she is comparatively isolated in the Holyrood group. She doesn't have a big support group because the SNP politicians have tended to move towards patronage quite a lot, and she doesn't have any patronage to get out. So I can see how she would feel a bit isolated, a bit under pressure, not super keen on it. The problem is I'm worried about, I think Kate's very capable, despite political differences I would have with her. And I'm worried that she's in the clear short position, which is, you can tell yourself that you've done the right thing by trying to have influence while letting your supporters down. And I fear that your supporters may move on. And that's would be my concern, is that Kate Forbes has just become another run-of-the-mill cabinet secretary who will have to answer for everything that's about to happen.
And then, Robin McAlpine, I'm going to put you in the market for giving some advice to John II, John Swinney. This will have to be unsolicited, I think, but nonetheless, if in the fairly unlikely event that John rings you up and says, "What you think I should do, Robin McAlpine?" What would you say to him?
Change your team. You're Swinney isn't exactly what we would call a reinventor. I'm damned if I can see what you would call any character progression in the sketched out character of John Swinney over the 20 or 25 years that I've been observing him. I don't see there's any chance for that change now. The only way that I could see that you would reinvigorate government from where he is would be to put in place a really, you would need to invigorate it through your paid staff. You don't have cabinet to bring in, and you don't have it in your tank. You're going to have to bring it in, buy it in from somewhere. I don't think that's going to happen. So to be completely honest with you, I just written a piece and I will dwell on whether it's too tough or not before I publish anything. But
as you normally do, Robin.
You see the stuff I don't publish. So there is a quote which I genuinely live my life by. And it's a quote by Karl Lagerfeld, who said, "Sweatpants are a sign of defeat. You lost control of your life, and so you bought some sweatpants." And the way that I'm feeling right now is John Swinney's a sign of defeat. Your party got lost, your party unraveled, your party keeps making mistakes, but you didn't know what else to do but just to look backwards and hug in. And I think it smells of defeat. It smells of an admission of failure to go back. And it's not even going back to a successful leader. It's going back. So I would say somehow apologise for the divide. I mean, John Swinney's been one of the most divisive of the people in the inter-movement wars. So I would say you need to lose that. You can't. I mean, as far as I can tell, what they mean by unity is everybody following me again, except for those lot over there that I don't like. I don't feel for any. I don't really feel that when John Swinney says he wants unity, he means me, for example. So I think that if he was serious about where we're going, he would need to think about living up to what unity means, and I'm not sure he'll do that. I would also say you need to draw a very firm line between you and your predecessor, who, I mean, let's be absolutely honest, could be in terrible, terrible legal toil here. And I don't think he can do that. I don't think he can credibly draw a line between him and the person to whom he was a deputy for over a decade. I would tell him to get a new team in, and I would tell him that he needs really bright, good, fresh policy thinking, because they cannot administer themselves out of this. And I see very little likelihood that that's going to happen either. So I could give advice. I just don't think it would be particularly worthwhile. You will gather I'm fairly despairing and pretty despondent just now. I think Scottish politics is going to go into a period of further decline now. And I thought that there was a chance that this might be the moment for those of us who are independent supporters, those who are left-minded. I thought this was it. I thought this was the moment when we might have hit rock bottom and we could start to go back up again. I had hoped that would be the case in the last leadership election. And when Humza was elected, I was pretty despondent because I knew everything that was going to happen, and I was right. I mean, I'm not just saying that respectively. I wrote down what was going to happen at the time, and it did all happen. But I always knew he wasn't going to survive the general election. So even though I was despondent then, I thought to myself, that's okay. There's an achievable window of time when we can then hit rock bottom and start to go back upwards. But I think they've just decided that no, rock bottom can go lower. And I think now it's hard to see when the inflection point is that we can start to go back upwards again. I do not, I mean, best will in the world, I do not believe that John Swinney can turn the fortunes of the Scottish Government round.
And there's no chance that if the much anticipated drubbing in the general election this year comes about, that John might be even briefer than Humza, decide to stand aside for new blood before the Scottish elections. Would you discount that entirely?
Well, I mean, right now in Scottish politics, if you tell me that Murdo Fraser was going to defect to the bloody SNP, it's been such utter chaos that I don't know if I would absolutely rule it out. So God knows. Generally, under normal circumstances, this is the point at which you say Sunak. You're in the Sunak phase, where you know the guy can't really do his job, but you know that changing him at this point is probably going to be even worse because it's going to look like total chaos. To go through three leaders in the space of 2 years in the run-up to a Scottish election would be brave, I think would be one way to put it. And I think what we can see is that there's a relentlessness about the SNP machine and its ability to shut down and just prevent debate about what's going wrong. And I think that's probably the more likely outcome. And if I'm right about this, this is what I'm trying to get people's heads around. What we're talking about now is rock bottom is 2026. It's June 26, when the SNP might not be able to put together a pro-India majority in the Scottish Parliament, and we're stuck for 5 years before there's anything that we can do about it. And that seems to me to be the path that we're currently on to just now. Now, whether there would be an assassination, a political assassination, if
you must watch the hate crime act when you're saying such things.
I'm really struggling this. I'm a generation where someone did something really bad, you said, somebody need to take him at the back and shoot him. And you can't say that stuff now because folk take everyone so literally.
Yes, you can't even say it if you're Murdo Fraser. You have to be very careful indeed.
Well, it's only recorded as an incident, though. It's not criminal yet. But so there is a chance that somebody somewhere in the party just flat out panics after a really bad general election, and they push it right to the limit. But the problem is, this is sad, but I actually think that I think that John Swinney is the Liz Truss candidate here, not in the sense that he's got a radical programme or that I think he's going to be that kind of unstable, in the sense that it looks like the moment when the party really started to say we're here to please ourselves, not pay any relevance or attention to the public, so we're going to pick the person that suits our preferences, our interests right now, and to hell with the rest of you. And that's what they did with Liz Truss. If you wanted to be elected, you don't elect Liz Truss as your leader. She's a madwoman. She was clearly not going to be good, but it was in the interests of a bunch of people in the Tories to do it. And the public get that impression. The public realise when you're pleasing yourself and taking them for granted. And I think that's what's just happened here. I'm really worried. Humza, I mean, it all happened so fast at the end there that I don't think people are focusing on the fact that Humza was down at minus 47% approval ratings. Right, so that's Trump doesn't hit that low. Biden's above that. I mean, this is dire numbers. And I'm saying to myself, what gives Swinney a 30-point bump on top of that? I cannot see what takes him and the SNP into the category of just normally unpopular, as opposed to a real collapse in confidence. Now, it might happen, but I'm not at all convinced.
One last question then, Robin, to give you the opportunity to send our independent supporters, give them a glimmer of hope in this dark horizon. I mean, despite the missed opportunities, the manifest missed opportunities of the last 10 years, despite the wrong turnings, despite disappearing up highways and byways for no apparent reason whatsoever, independent support has stayed pretty rock solid around the 50%. And that's a spectacular thing if you take a historical view. So isn't that an easier thing, given that level of support in the country, to find a way to reassemble the political furniture in a way that puts independence back on the front foot than it would be, for example, if you had the best politicians in the world, but independent support was down at 25%.
Right, so what this feels like to me, absolutely, without any doubt, and again, I'm going to emphasise, I'm saying this in my capacity as a political strategist. What this feels like to me is being adrift, dehydrating in a rowing boat on the sea. It's so close, all that water. It's so close. You just can't drink it, and you will die watching the thing that can save you all around you. I can only emphasise this again. I have never at any point since 2014 really wavered from my argument, and I don't now, from my argument that the fundamentals for achieving a substantial independence win are just in front of us, and the gap between now and that is about 3 years of doing the right stuff. So I could go on about this for hours. I wrote an entire book about it. I talk about this, which frankly can go on for quite a long time. Every indicator I see says we've got 50+% solid and they're not going backwards, and we have another 10% to 15% who every indicator tells me their views are soft enough to shift if we do the right stuff. We know we've been at 55%. This takes us past where the No campaign was in 2014, and I think that's a benchmark that we need to look at. We need to beat them by more than they beat us. That's how I think we put this to bed. And it's all just there, all the conditions that you need. I mean, again, I always think about political strategy a bit like baking a cake. Before you go anywhere near an oven, check you've got your ingredients. Are all the ingredients there? Are all the ingredients in place? Is everything you need? I cannot see a single thing that we're lacking apart from the start, putting it together. But the problem is, the other thing that this tells me at the moment is that the next phase of this, the next phase of what takes us to independence, will not take place in Parliament. The next phase of this is going to take place in communities. We have got to shift opinion, and I never believed that was best done solely through politics, and I certainly don't believe it's going to be done by John Swinney. So that's what we need to do. The problem is, that's simultaneously to say that the SNP, which has just demonstrated a complete incapacity to let go of any control, would need to let go of some control, and it won't. And this is what's killing me, is I could I could look at where we are just now, and I could give you a plan, and I would be reasonably confident that we'd be good to go, certainly by 2028, 29, 30. Certainly. And what drives me up the wall is the timescale will remain the same however long we wait. If we wait a year, if we wait now, I think you could do it in 3 years. If we wait a year, it'll be 4 years. If we wait 2 years, it'll be 5 years. And my problem is I now think we're going to wait 4 or 5 years, which means it's going to be a decade. And that's the frustration for me. Not that we do not have everything we need, but that there's a self-interest still stuck in here, which is going to prevent it because it isn't meeting the wider needs of a political interest group. And that's where I am. So I remain utterly confident that it's in our hands and we can shift it fast when we're ready to. I don't believe we can do it from Parliament. I don't believe we can do it over television screens shouting at people. And I don't believe we can do it with a firm, steely grip being held on all of this by one clique at the top of a political party. I believed, this is in the end why I'm so fundamentally despondent today, I believed Kate Forbes was going to let go. I don't believe John Swinney will. And until somebody does, they're just going to strangle the life out of it, which is what's been happening. So it's there. But I would not have said this quite as strongly as before as now. The biggest barrier to Scottish independence is now the SNP.
With these strong words, but still a tantalising prospect, Rob McAlpine, thank you so much for joining me in Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Welcome back. Now, in last week's show, we anticipated the red card for the Greens, and this is what commentator Ian McWhirter and former member of the Scottish Parliament Jim Eadie had to say.
Ian McWhirter, is it now curtains for the SNP Green coalition?
Well, I don't know about curtains, but for some time now, I think it's fair to say a number of people in the Scottish National Party have been feeling that the green tail has been wagging the dog. And now it seems that the tail is trying to wag itself off itself and perhaps go off on its own. And maybe that is a moment to sort of review this arrangement, which I think has been pretty damaging on the whole for the Scottish National Party. If you think of the number of policy failures from the deposit return scheme to gender reform, and now this bizarre controversy over the Cass report, I don't know how really Patrick Harvey, leader of the Scottish Green Party, can say what he said about the Cass report, suggesting very strongly that it was it's an exercise in transphobic culture wars, and really remain as a representative of the Scottish government, because I don't think that is. I mean, Hamza has been very ambiguous about this, but I don't think that is really a proper reflection of the position of the Scottish government currently.
Would you say, from the Green Party perspective, what's the dangers for them if they go out of the coalition? I mean, are they going to be accused of being lukewarm on independence and also not particularly strong in the achievement of green objectives?
I think, obviously, the Greens will be apoplectic because, the issue. I actually think the motivation in seeking to bring down the Butte House Agreement has more to do with the caste review and what one Green MSP rather foolishly branded it as being a conservative transphobic document.
The caste review is what exactly?
The caste review, of course, was the independent review undertaken by a leading paediatrician clinician to look at gender dysphoria services for children and young people in England. But of course it has much wider ramifications than healthcare in England. It is something that should be looked at across the whole of these islands and further afield.
And this is what you had to say. Wee Shuey says, "The Yes movement is as strong as it ever was. I may change my party politics, but independence will always be the goal. Just a shame some politicians don't see that." Geronimo says, "Impressive, knowledgeable guests. It's intriguing watching them politic in real time. Wish it wasn't all so messy though. In the long run, I think it will be positive for Alba. The number of pro-Indie MSPs still needs to grow, which is still the main problem for all of us. The other problem for the MSPs talking about calibre is they seem to be only focused on their party positions rather than country first. It clouds and taints all their rhetoric. For Scotland, keep the faith." Louise Hogg says, "Jenny Lee sounds an inspiring figure." Of course, that was Alex's Scotland's Hidden Hero last week. "Access to education is so important for people to change their own lives." Paul Taylor says, "The SNP were never a single issue party, but this whole gender business with the Greens has really caused them to lose their focus these last few years." Malik says, "Greens were bad for the SNP. Hamza was as bad as Nicola. Alex Salmond is Mr. Scotland, Mr. Independence." Thank you very much indeed for all your comments, and please do keep them coming in. And I have to say, I anticipate there'll be a lot more where they came from next week as you let us know what you thought about Alex's interview with Rod McAlpine and indeed, of course, the future of the SNP. Now, now's the point where I normally say over to Alex and his favourite part of the show, which is, of course, as you well know, Scotland's Hidden Heroes in association with Flagship Media. But because the events of this week led to a necessarily extended interview with Rod McAlpine, we won't have time to turn to that this week, or indeed next week, where you can look forward to us being live at the All Under One Banner March. But meanwhile, we're now going to turn to Alex for his thoughts on what's going to happen after this week's tumultuous events. But to hear what Alex has to say, you'll have to stay tuned until after the break. We'll see you then.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
You know, there's going to be a moment in perhaps a few weeks, perhaps a few months' time, but a moment will come in the still of the night where Humza Yousaf will wake up or can't get to sleep, and all of a sudden he'll think to himself, why on earth did I not accept Ash Regan's deal? Now that moment will come because that's what Humza Yousaf should have done. And he will think that because people who resign often regret that resignation, and that's particularly the case if you've only been in office for a year. And Humza Yousaf wanted to be First Minister. No doubt he wanted to do a good job as First Minister. So he'll reflect and wonder whether he could have stayed First Minister for much longer. And of course, the agonising prospect, as you look back, of course he could. He could have survived this week by taking the eminently sensible proposals that were offered to him by Ash Regan of Alaba, which wouldn't have required any sacrifice on his part, but would have ensured his survival. Would that have made any difference? Well, Robin McAlpine says no. He thinks that it was fated that Humza would go down. I just wonder about that. There was a glimpse just over a week ago when Humza Yousaf announced £80 million for housing out of the active travel budget, which was the £200 million that Patrick Harvey had secreted away. He announced £80 million for something which was the people's priorities, because active travel is very important, but not as important perhaps as putting a roof over people's heads and giving them a warm, secure home to live in. Because that was one of the Alba requests of Humza Yousaf, to refocus the Scottish Government's energies away from niche arguments and towards the things that matter to people: housing, health, education, and above all, jobs. Not a big ask for a First Minister who wants to make a success of his term of office. So what else do we learn now? I mean, are the prospects for the Scottish National Party as dismal now as Robin McAlpine outlines, now that we anticipate the coronation of John Swinney? Well, not necessarily so. I mean, there could be lessons learned. I mean, the first lesson would be that the Scottish Green Party are not reliable allies in the quest for independence. Yes, of course, they were summarily dismissed by Humza Yousaf, but there was a reason for that. He couldn't any longer tolerate ministers who were irrationally giving interviews which were defying science, as well as women's rights and girls' rights and the rights of children. Very difficult for a First Minister to tolerate that. He couldn't any longer justify the vast screeds of expenditure which were going under the SNP Green, the Butte House deal, and wasting the government's resources and wasting the SNP's political and electoral popularity. But the Green reaction, which was to bring down an SNP, a nationalist First Minister, was quite extraordinary. It pushed things to the absolute limits. The Tories allying with the Greens to actually finish off a nationalist First Minister. And what was even more worrying is after the day after Humza's resignation, the Greens and the SNP MSPs were in the Scottish Parliament hand in hand as if nothing had happened. They had assassinated the SNP First Minister, and SNP MSPs shrug their shoulders and says, let's continue on. Mere professional pride should tell you that that should not have been the reaction. And the lesson for the future is if you're going to make alliances through the Scottish Parliament, then do with them people who actually believe in independence, not people who see it as a convenient thing to bolster their political support. So where do we go from now? Rob McAlpine doesn't think that John Swinney has it in him to change direction, and certainly there's been nothing in John Swinney's recent actions that shows that he's going to live up to his call for unity and independence, which was the theme of his launch press conference. On the contrary, it seems to be unity around the SNP and the chosen direction, which hasn't been going so well. But if the prospects for the SNP look pretty dismal, that's not necessarily true of the prospects for independence. Because despite all of the lost opportunities of the last 10 years, despite all of the the failed initiatives around the highways and byways of politics, there's still a solid 50% support for Scottish independence. And you ask yourself, if a population is so tolerant as to sustain its support for a constitutional objective, despite the fact that those pursuing it seem to be doing everything possible to try and impede the progress, then it must be possible, surely, to arrange the political furniture, to arrange the politicians and the political parties and the movement in such a way as progress can resume. Robert McAlpine says we've got to get to that magic figure of above the no victory of 2014. I think what we really need is the political will and determination. I think there's an army waiting to be led, but what we require is the vision and the politicians who've got the capacity to lead it.
And with that, we come to the end, sadly, of this week's show, which we both hope you have thoroughly enjoyed. Remember to watch us every Saturday morning at 10 a.m.
Before the football.
Yes, before the football, of course, and on every social media channel you can shake a stick at, to quote Alex. Now, of course, today is a very special day because it's the day of the All Under One Banner March in Glasgow.
Yes, and I'm going off to change. I'm going to change into more sensible shoes and I'll limp my way through the whole procession, but I'll have my camera crew with me. So those of you who are lucky enough to be watching this show and about to go under the All Under One Banner March, look out for me and my crew.
And of course, I will be changing my shoes as ever because I'll be marching all the way to Glasgow Green. So we hope to see you there on site on the march, marching for Scotland's independence. So we'll see you at the march, or we'll see you again online next week. But for now, from both of us,
bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.